system of a tree. We've already looked at leaves, we've looked at the stems and the transport systems that are found in stems. So let's take a look at the roots, because the roots are just as important to support the tree and hold them up, or other plants, to hold them up into the air so they can actually get to the sun and produce photosynthesis. So let's take a look at these roots. So once again, remember that all trees have three main tissue types: dermal, ground, and vascular. So we're going to break up the different parts that are found in roots. The first part we're going to talk about is the dermal tissue. Now the epidermis is also found on the outside of roots. So in this particular picture, the dermal tissue that we're going to talk about is this sort of I'm going to say this brownish type of color. And it's found on the outside of the root. And this is a protection. So the epidermis, the function of it is to protect and absorb. So it absorbs water. It's going to allow water to penetrate it, but it also is to protect the root itself. Now this epidermis is covered in root hairs, as you can see here in the picture. It has these little tiny hairs. Now these hairs actually penetrate the spaces between soil particles, and this way it can produce a lot of surface area that allows water and minerals to enter the root. So it's kind of like when you start to shiver, you get little goosebumps, and that's because your body is trying to have more surface area to get warmer. This, in a way, is the same thing. Has these little root hairs to increase its surface area, to have more space, more surface area to allow water and minerals to enter the root. So everywhere you see this brownish type of color, that is the dermal tissue. Now let's talk about the ground tissue that's found in a root. Now the ground tissue can be found in two places in this root, in the cortex and the endodermis. So let's take a look at the cortex first. So in this picture, the ground tissue is this grayish type of tissue. So it's found on the inside. Now the cortex, if you see from this picture, is located directly next to the epidermis, all the way around here. Now the cortex, or the function of the cortex, is to move water and minerals from the epidermis towards the center of the root. So here's the outside, or the epidermis. Once that water moves in, it's going to help move that water towards the center. It also stores starches. So some of those starches that are found, that are created, such as the sugars, are actually stored in this the ground tissue here. Now the second type of ground tissue found in a root is your endodermis. And the function of the endodermis is that it encloses the vascular cylinder. This also helps move water and minerals towards the center of the root. Now if we take a look at this picture, the endodermis rests between the cortex and what's here, which is the vascular bundle, or the vascular cylinder. So this acts as a little bit of a protection for this vascular cylinder, which is very important. That's your xylem and your phloem. The third main tissue type that's found in all plants, but specifically in the root, is the vascular tissue. And this is in the vascular cylinder, or what we've been calling in the leaves and the stems the vascular bundle. So if we flip-flop those names, they mean exactly the same thing. So in this tissue, or in this picture of the root, the vascular tissue is the red and the yellow, and this is all that stuff that's in the center. Now remember in the last video, xylem and phloem are very, very important for the plant. Xylem carries water, and phloem carries the sugars. So these are bundled together, and the function is really to transport those things that are needed throughout the plant, the water and the nutrients and the sugars, up and down the stem and to the leaves from the root. So your vascular cylinder, or your vascular bundle, is right here in the center, and that's your vascular tissue. Now we have something that's called apical meristem. Now the apical meristem has a very important function in the root because this is part of the root cap. Now the meristem is where you have the cells regrowing, so this is where new root is actually formed. But you need a root cap in order to protect the root. Otherwise, if the root gets damaged, then it's going to die and it's not going to be able to function properly. So the root cap, which is here in green, is a mixture of just epidermal cells. And what it is, it protects the meristem as the root tip forces its way through the soil. So you can imagine, as the root is moving through, it's going to encounter rocks, it's going to encounter hard soils, and so this root cap protects the apical meristem, which is where the new cells are formed for the root. Now, the root cap secretes a slippery substance that eases the progress of the root through the soil. So, kind of like an earthworm does, it releases a slippery substance in order to move, same way that the root cap does it as well. Now, on the same lines as the last video, let's talk a little bit about how water moves through the plant. Now we know that water moves through the xylem in the plant, and the root systems are very important for the water to be absorbed through those root hairs. Now, the root hairs absorb the water and minerals directly from soil by osmosis. We've talked about osmosis in former videos. The water is going to diffuse into the root hair down its concentration gradient, meaning from high concentration to low concentration, through the partially permeable cell membranes. So water is going to move up these xylem vessels in the same way that a drink moves up a straw when you drink through it. We've talked about cohesion and adhesion before. So let's quickly review cohesion. So cohesion is where water molecules like to stick to each other. Adhesion is where the water molecules will stick to another substance. So as as water moves up the xylem vessel, it's not only sticking to itself, but the water's also sticking to the xylem vessels on the outside as well. Now water moves through the plant in a process called transpiration. So transpiration reduces the pressure at the top of these xylem vessels. And this is happening at the leaves. So transpiration is happening right up here at the leaves. And in our next slide, we're going to discuss and see how that happens. So water transport in plants happens because of something called transpirational pull. Now transpiration is a process in which water molecules are actually kind of like sweated out of a plant. Now I don't want to really say that they're sweating out because plants do not sweat. But think of transpiration as a way of extra water to move outside of the plant. So in this picture of the plant here, notice that we have this arrow right here. It's going out. So transpirational pull happens because what happens is because the cell walls near the stomata begin to dry out. So water is essentially evaporating from the plant. Water molecules are pulled from the cells deep within the plant. And so because of cohesion, we have water molecules that are attached to each other, moving from the root up through the stems, through the leaves, and out the leaves, because those water molecules are attracted to each other. And this happens because of capillary action. And we've discussed capillary action in both class and in other videos. So remember, cohesion is where those water molecules are going to be attached to each other because of those hydrogen bonds. Because of adhesion, this is where the water molecules are attracted to the xylem vessels on the sides, or basically the cellulose. So in this picture, we have, and I'm not sure why it's all these little clowns, but we have all of these little clowns attached to each other by a rope. So as they start to move up, they move up this ladder, They're all attached to the rope. So that is cohesion right there. They're all attached to the rope, so they're all attached to each other. As the first clown kind of comes over the ladder and starts to fall, all the other little clowns that are attached to the rope are also going to follow the first clown. This is what happens in transpirational pull. Imagine these clowns as water molecules. So once that first molecule over here leaves the cell, it's attracted to all those other water molecules behind it. So it gets pulled up from the roots, up through the stems, and into the leaves, and out through the stomata. And this is transpirational pull. This is how water actually moves from the ground all the way up through the stem and through the leaves. By transpirational pull. Just remember the clowns. The clowns climb up the ladder and then they fall over. And that's transpirational pull. Now, nutrient transport happens similarly, but not really, because it uses a process of active transport. Nutrients, such as sugar, move through something called the pressure flow hypothesis. So if we take a look at this picture, we have xylem moving water up through the plant because of transpirational pull. We also have this phloem here, and phloem is moving all these little red dots. It's going to move the sugar molecules down the plant because the glucose is stored up here in the leaves, or it's created in the leaves, and then it's going to move down because the other parts of the plant also need a little bit of food. Basically, it needs a little bit of glucose in order to do its stuff that it does. So taking a look at this picture, in each stage, I have a little explanation over on the side. So in stage number 1, this is where active transport moves sugars into the phloem from the surrounding tissue. So whatever cell it's coming from the leaf, we have active transport moving all these sugar molecules from an area of low concentration to an area of high concentration. So this is going to be active transport. Now, water is also coming from the xylem, and this creates osmotic pressure at the source of the sugar. So remember that osmotic pressure. So this could be creating a hypo or a hypertonic solution or isotonic solution depending upon what's going on in the plant. As the water and the nutrients start to move down through the phloem, it's going to enter this third stage right here, this third place. Now, wherever the need for sugars are for the plant, they're going to move where the plant needs them, and that's what's called a sink cell. And once again, they're going to be moved through active transport. So if this cell down here at stage 3, let's say it's coming into the root system over here, if that's where some sugar is needed, then sugar will be entering into this cell through active transport as well, and then that cell is going to get what it needs. So let's just take a look at this pressure flow hypothesis one more time. We have the sugar starting way up in the leaves. It's going to move into the phloem through active transport. Water also comes into this phloem as well from the xylem. It's going to create some osmotic pressure, and it's going to move these sugars downward into the place where it needs. So the third stage is the sink cell. Whatever cell needs to receive the sugar, it's going to move into the cell through active transport as well, and then it's going to receive the sugar that it needs. And remember, this is called the pressure flow hypothesis.